Hello everybody, Scottsword here, and welcome back to another strategy guide video for Fury of Dracula. And in this one, we are going to be discussing the three Hunter allies. That's right, the three event cards in the deck which the Hunters can use to equip an ally that goes into the corner of the board if you're playing in person, or into the little ally in play section of the digital edition of the game, and they're there loitering with intent, ready to help out the hunters if the right conditions are met. These allies often don't get maybe talked about as much, at least when we talk about strategy and things. So I thought it'd be a nice little video to just discuss these three allies in on their own and go through their strengths and weaknesses and such, and see what I make of them. And also, this is kind of a little bit of an opportunity for me to get my own back, because we recently, myself and Roscoe and Pizza Wizard and Captain Gyro, very recently did a tier listing of all the Hunter event cards, and I think one of the allies got a little bit done by. So now this is my platform. There are no guests. I can talk on my own about these allies, and my opinion is law. So let's see. I mean, feel free to put all your comments down below, of course. I was only teasing back there. But anyway, let's get into it. And first of all, we should probably say what the three allies are, just in case you don't know who they are. They are Jonathan Harker, Rufus Smith, and Sister Agatha. In the community, we normally just refer to them as Harker, Rufus, and Aggie. I know there's also Mina Harker in the game, but we normally refer to her as Mina, so then that way we don't get that mixed up. So if I will most likely be using the names Harker, Rufus, and Aggie during this. So just in case anyone gets confused, if you hear those things, that is what I am referring to. And then we should look at what. Hey, look at that. Top-notch animation. Anyway, so this is the back of the Hunter card, or the Hunter event card. So I guess it would be the back or the front. It would be the front, I suppose. Well, whatever, it doesn't matter. The other side of the card that tells you what the cards do. All the allies have two different abilities, and when they are drawn, the Hunter players, I guess, because if you're working as a team, have to decide if you're going to, which ability of the ally you're going to activate. So the first ability that all three of them have is exactly the same. You can use it to search one location. So it's almost like the way we'd call it a poor man's hired scout. Instead of naming two cities, and then Dracula has to declare if those cities are on the trail or not, or in layers, the hunters can use the search effect from the ally just to search one city. If this is drawn early game, there are some sort of pitfalls with this. The same as hired scouts, but even worse, because it is sometimes a little bit of a needle in haystack situation, right? It's very difficult to get this ally to work efficiently. If you've just discovered Dracula's trail by some other means, like a hired scout or newspaper reports, and then you want to use the ally to then search a particular location, maybe further up or down the trail, or if Dracula's just wolf formed and you suddenly draw an ally and you want to check, the furthest possible location from the hunters that Dracula could have reached with that wolf form, just to rule that possibility out, that definitely can work. And also, of course, there is the other event card, Surprising Return, which allows you to bring back discarded allies to search if you so wish, or to equip the ally effect. But in terms of thinking about just the search ability, Surprising Return is quite a good card in the tiered list. It got a little bit of a mixed reception, let's say. I think in the end it ended up getting placed quite low, but the problem with Surprising Return is it does require quite a lot of setup. You need to have those allies in the discard pile, and sometimes in a game you might not draw any allies. You might draw one, and then your ally, the ally, good choice of words there, you'll activate the ally ability of the ally rather than searching and putting it into the discard pile, because you don't know if you're going to get a Surprising Return later. The number of times I've drawn an ally, I've equipped them as the ally rather than searching, and then I instantly draw Surprising Return, and it feels really bad, but it is what it is. But Surprising Return does have quite a bit of potential. You can search on demand, and it also doesn't cost an action, which is pretty neat. But it does require a bit of setup, and sometimes, as I said, you don't draw enough allies and discard them to make Surprise Return work. Or you just draw other events and then Surprise Return gets discarded naturally. So you can't really rely on that too much, but when it works really well. So yeah, all the allies have this additional sort of search effect, like a poor man's hired scouts. So there's no real difference between them there. But the thing that is obviously the most cool about them is the sort of the unique ally abilities that each of these three ally cards has. So we'll go through each of them and we'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses. Before we do that, though, a really important point is if the hunters equip the ally permanently, rather than using the search ability, if they permanently equip Harker or Rufus or Aggie as an ally, the ally is almost I don't want to put a percentage on it, but it's almost guaranteed to be in play for the rest of the game. Why is that? There is a Dracula event card called Devilish Power that Dracula can use to discard the hunter's current ally, regardless of what ally it is, and just burn it into the discard pile. So this is the way that Dracula can kind of mess with the ally plans of the hunters. But there's a bit of an issue with this, right? It's not as straightforward as it seems. At least, especially when you're thinking about the meta that we play with in the digital edition community. Devilish Power firstly has 3 different effects. It doesn't just discard the hunter's current ally. Dracula has to choose which effect Devilish Power is going to be used for. Well, to be honest, there's only really 2. the last one about hunters not being able to supply during the next hunter phase. To be honest, we could almost pretend that doesn't exist, because the most likely situation is by the time it gets to a really important part of the game and Dracula has obtained Devilish Power, the hunters would have supplied enough anyway. I guess the only exception would be if you suddenly realize that the hunters don't have a really critical event like a vampire lair to give them one more day, or consecrated ground to kill Dracula or something, then, and if they're digging for that event card, then Dracula could just use Devilish Power like that. But I don't think I've ever seen Devilish Power being used for that effect. So it leaves you down to 2. Removing Consecrated Ground token from the board or discarding the hunter's current ally. But to be honest, we're always going to almost use Devilish Power for the first option. The threat of Consecrated Ground is just far too great for Dracula. We talked about it in the tier listing. And again, we're talking about allies, and now we're talking about Consecrated Ground, but that's just the way this game works. Consecrated Ground is most likely the most powerful card in the game. The only one that can maybe come close is Renewed Vigor, but it's very different to Consecrated Ground. But Dracula has to play around Consecrated Ground so much, even if he has a huge amount of distance. Over the hunters, a huge distance advantage. Consecrated Ground can be thrown out at infinite range, deal damage to him, force him into hunters, all this sort of stuff, right? So Devilish Power is normally either obtained through a hoax, or if it gets picked up naturally from a night supply or something, because Dracula wants to counter Consecrated Ground, right? And you're going to use Devilish Power for that purpose, not for discarding the hunter's current ally, right? If Consecrated Ground has somehow been discarded in some way or has already been used, then that's maybe a different story. But the other reason why you probably wouldn't use Devilish Power to discard the hunter's current ally is because Surprising Return exists, right? And it would feel really bad for a Dracula player that during the Dracula phase, you play Devilish Power, this really powerful event card, get rid of the hunter's current ally, like Aggie, she's gone, Rufus Smith is gone, and then the hunters instantly bring that ally back into play on the very next Dawn phase. So that is the big issue of Devilish Power. It is too easily countered by Surprising Return. Even though there are 2 copies of Devilish Power, there are 2 copies of Surprising Return, Dracula rarely gets event cards. At least in the current meta that we're playing in. I don't want to age this video badly in any way, but we've actually got a tournament, as of the time of recording, we've got a tournament coming up very soon where we're going to be introducing a mechanic that will actually give Dracula more event cards. So we might see more Devilish Powers come into play and things, but in most games, Dracula obtains probably less than one event card per game, right? Because hunters normally don't night supply until the very end if they're very desperate, or if Dracula obtains a hoax mature. And normally hunters are getting really good now at stopping those early matures because the threat of a hoax mature is really great. Not only does Dracula get an event card, but also then it puts all the Dracula events back into the event deck and it really messes up with the hunter's future plans. So hunters really work hard to stop hoax matures because it's going to be devastating. Um, and even then, even if Dracula does obtain a hoax mature, is Devilish Power the card they're going to pick up? I mean, sure, it counters Consecrated Ground, which is amazing, but there are other event cards like Unearthly Swiftness that should be considered. Emmanuel Hildesheim, Darkness Returns, maybe Summon Storms if you're trying to think of some sort of later strategy where you go to Cagliari or Britannia and you want to try and block off the hunters from getting to you. So it's not clear cut that Devilish Power is the card that Dracula's going to obtain anyway. So yeah, that's the big issue here, where the hunters have the ease at which the hunters can bring the ally back is way greater than what Dracula can do. And Dracula doesn't want to use probably their only event card in the game, which is like Gold Dust, because you can play many Dracula games that don't get any event cards at all, and then suddenly, within a matter of 10 seconds in between Dracula finishing his turn and the hunter starting their turn, that Surprise Return comes out and brings the ally back. If you see that both Surprise Returns have been burned, okay, that's a different story. There might be a really critical turn, which we'll talk about later, if Dracula cannot afford to take one more damage from Rufus Smith. Okay, then you can do it. Because the timing will work out in your favor. But in most cases, Devilish Power is not going to be used to get rid of the ally. So therefore, whatever ally the hunters pick and equip is going to be there for the entire game. So Dracula's going to have to deal with it no matter what. It's not going to be got rid of in any way. Okay, so that's really important to factor that in going forward. And also, depending on what ally card is currently in play, then not only do the hunters have to adapt their strategy based on that, but also then Dracula has to be wary of what allies in play and then how that's going to sort of dictate the rest of the game. So let's talk about Rufus Smith and Sister Agatha a little bit sort of together. I'll go into them individually, but they both have a similar effect. Not in terms of exactly how they work, but I'll bring up the next thing. They both deal damage to Dracula, right? So you can kind of view them in a similar way, even though they're different. The main objective of the Hunters is to kill Dracula, right? So any sort of card that can do damage to Dracula is a good card. That can't be understated at all. So that's really key. Obviously, Rufus does it in terms of sea travel. Dracula will take almost, not quite, but almost double damage from going to sea. Whereas Aggie affects Dracula's combat and restricts what he could, well, it doesn't restrict what he can do, but he takes damage if he successfully resolves Escapist Bat or Escapist Mist or Fangs. So let's go and talk about Rufus Smith first in a little bit more detail. As I said, it affects Dracula's sea movement. He's taking more damage when he goes to sea, and this effect of Rufus Smith is even more potent once we start talking about 3 or more sea moves consecutively. I'm gonna we'll get the gifs going. Oh, if the GIF actually wants to work. There we go. The GIF lagged. That's nice, isn't it? Yeah, we'll get all. I can hear all the comments. I can hear Roscoe shouting "nerd" from hundreds of miles away. But I'm going to show you a graph. I don't care. This is basically the graph here. We got the blue circles are showing you the amount of damage that Dracula takes when he's moving consecutive movements at sea, up between 0 and 5 moves. And then the red triangles are the same, but if Rufus Smith is in play for the entire duration. And you can see that obviously for 0 and 1 moves, it's the same, because Dracula always takes 2 damage when he initially enters the sea. So Rufus Smith doesn't come into play there. It's only then thereafter that the difference occurs between having Rufus Smith and not having Rufus Smith. And the difference really starts to scale the more and more consecutive sea moves that Dracula makes. I'm being a little bit exaggerating here that Dracula might move 5 sea spaces. I've definitely seen it. I've seen Dracula's move 5 sea spaces in a game. But normally we're looking around maybe 3 or 4, and we're looking at 2 or 3 extra damage, which is definitely not to be sneezed at. That is quite a bit, especially then if Dracula has to land somewhere and then quite quickly go back to sea again. If he lands in Cagliari, for example, then has to leave again. The damage is going to add up. Um, I can hear all the comments now with people saying, "Oh, but why on earth would Dracula move more than 3 sea spaces, or 3 or more sea spaces? That's ridiculous." In most situations, when Dracula goes to sea, he will want to move as many sea spaces as possible, kind of. There are situations, of course, where Dracula might only move 1 sea space. But, and there's something else I'll talk about in another video, but going to sea is disadvantageous for Dracula. He's taking damage, he's not placing encounter cards, so he has to then maximize the benefits of going to sea, and the way you do that in most cases is to increase the amount of distance between himself and the hunters as much as possible. Now, sometimes just moving 1 sea move is enough for that. If you're thinking of something like going from southern Italy across to Valona, for example, that, depending on the hunter positions, that could be enough. But in many other situations, especially sort of towards mid and late game, moving more sea spaces will mean more distance from the hunters. And that's what Dracula will want to do. And also then is to create more uncertainty about his location. If Dracula only moves 1 sea space, and if the hunters have a pretty good idea of what sea zone he entered or what port he left from, then they can work out very easily where he landed. The more and more sea spaces you add to the equation, in general, depends on where on the map we're talking, but in general, then the amount of uncertainty about where Dracula is currently at sea and then lands increases. And if the hunters don't have the right sort of cards like a money trail, hypnosis, or dare I say a surprising return to start eliminating regions, then that's going to be very problematic. And even if Dracula has taken damage, he might have a little bit more time now to feed and then wolf form and do whatever the things he needs to do. So I'll give you a little example. And again, people might comment, "Oh, you're cherry picking this example," but this is an example that you see quite often in tournament games. If Dracula goes into Iberia and eventually has to leave because he's scared of a renewed vigor combo or something and all the hunters charging in and killing him, it's quite common that Dracula will leave, say, from Lisbon or Cadiz, for example, right? If Dracula moves 1 sea space, right, he's in South Atlantic. There's no point Dracula landing here because we know then it's either Lisbon or Santander, and it'll be very easy for the hunters to deal with that. If Dracula moves 2 sea spaces, okay, we don't know if he's going to North Atlantic or Mediterranean. A wolf form from the Mediterranean wouldn't be terrible here. I guess it also depends on the position of the hunters. Wolf form from Mediterranean might be enough, but if he just lands normally, then, once you rule out Ireland and Cagliari, there's not many other places. It can be quite easy for the hunters to maybe discover what direction Dracula's gone in. If Dracula moves 3 sea spaces, right, now you've opened it up to 4 possible sea locations he's currently in, and then once he lands, that's 3 possible regions. Germania, anywhere in Britannia, it could be Ireland, it could be the southern coast of England, or maybe Edinburgh, or Wolverhampton, Manchester, it could be Tyrrhenian. And that really much splits the board in half. Another thing that, Dracula players can do is leave from the Tyrrhenian, and then they can choose to go Ionian or Mediterranean. I know there's only 2 sea spaces, but still. What the hunters want to do is, if Dracula is trying to play this game where he's trying to maximize distance from them and then also create uncertainty about where he's going, then if he's getting punished for it by taking even more damage, then that's the trade-off that the hunters have to take. And then even better, if Dracula goes to all that bother trying to create all that obfuscation, moving 3 or 4 sea spaces so that the hunters don't know exactly where he is, and then the hunters play Money Trail anyway, or Hypnosis anyway, and then it's followed up by CG and Renewed Vigors and all that stuff. Dracula's going to be in a real lot of pain because he would have taken extra damage from the sea movement. Dracula will need to feed just to compensate for the damage that Rufus Smith has done not just the base damage you're going to see. But maybe he can't do that now because the hunters know where he is and they're charging in with extra weathers and renewed vigors and stuff. And then that makes combat, a later combat, even easier. So you're just making Dracula's making himself very weak because of that. Especially if he's taken damage previously as well from wolf forms and maybe an early combat or something. So, kind of wrapping up the pros here, that it makes sea movement even more disadvantageous for Dracula. I'm going to make a video about this. In general, sea movement is bad for Dracula. It is necessary in many situations, but it is disadvantageous. It is not good. And I want to say this now, if anybody's watching this and thinks, oh, sea movement for Dracula is OP. No, it isn't. Get that thought out of your head right now. It isn't. So if you're creating a situation that's bad for Dracula and you're making it even worse with Rufus Smith, that's good. But as I said, there are times where Dracula has to go to sea, because if he doesn't, he's going to get jumped on by multiple hunters and die. So he has to take that option and go to sea. So if you're punishing him even more for that, then that's good. And as I said, you're compensating if Dracula's trying to play the obfuscation game. What sea space am I in? There are maybe 3 or 4 possibilities. He's getting punished for it. As I said, if he's already taken damage, then he's getting even weaker. He's landing with maybe half health or maybe a little bit less. And it just depends on how the rest of the game has panned out, obviously. The big con, which Roscoe reminds me of repeatedly, is, well, it's useless if Dracula doesn't go to sea, which I cannot deny. But I think there's also this sort of psychological impact here, where if Dracula knows that Rufus Smith is in play, then Dracula has to now weigh up even more. Do I take more risks and stay on land and potentially get jumped on by multiple hunters and then just die anyway and take even more damage? Or do I take the hit and go to sea, but then I'm taking damage for free and the hunters aren't doing anything? The hunters can sit there and while I'm at sea and supply and all this sort of thing, right? And I think as hunters, if Dracula's going to sea, it also depends on the timing, of course, but if the hunters haven't given up much influence, it's still not extremely close to the 4th week, and Dracula's going to sea, I mean, that's the hunters' kind of dream scenario, to be honest, and they can just sit there and supply and do whatever they want to do, and then catch Dracula when he lands again. So it also depends on what event cards and items and movement they've got. But as always, in this game, everything is so interconnected. Everything is it's a massive web between all the different factors in the game. But we're trying to isolate it and just looking at the ally cards, but that's very difficult. So that's why conversation about everything else starts coming in. But I think Rufus Smith, very good card, in my opinion. Right, let's bring Aggie back in. And we'll talk about combat for a little bit. Right, so what Aggie does is sits there in combat and waits to strike. Often, a lot of people forget that Aggie's there. It's only then in combat when Dracula tries to fang or something. And then Aggie pops up and goes, oh yeah, Aggie exists. It's an extra hunter in combat. What it doesn't restrict Dracula's choices necessarily, because obviously the only choices he has are the cards he has in his combat hand. But what it does, it creates a cost for Dracula to play certain cards. Escapist Mist we can maybe discard because normally Draculas don't want to play Escapist Mist. If you're having to play Escapist Mist, then I think that's a bad situation, right? As in Dracula in combat, you want to be killing the hunter or escaping his bat. Escapist Miss is like the worst case scenario. You're only doing it if you need to survive, and then you're going to move to win or something. So, yeah, we'll kind of forget about Escapist Miss for a little bit. Escapist Bat is quite good. You're punishing Dracula a little bit by if he's able to escape his bat. Escapist Bat is very powerful. Yeah, the fact that Dracula can then move basically 2 roads for free, or up to 2 roads for free, and then he'll get his turn thereafter, is very strong. The problem I have with Aggie doing damage to Escapist Bat is the hunters are very wary that Escapist Bat is potent, and therefore they are not going to take a lot of risks with their anti-Escapist Bat items, right? We really value things like knives and rifles, and maybe a card like Lucy's Revenge. Sorry, I had to get that in there. Right, that can stop the Escapist Bat. So, but then again, maybe it gives you a psychological boost. If you know that Aggie's in play, then maybe as the hunter you can be a little bit more risky with your escape as bat items because you know if it gets broken and Dracula escapes, okay, he's escaped his bat, but at least he's taking 2 damage for it. If Dracula gets really low, he won't be able to escape his bat at all. But then you have to get him really low to get to that point, and maybe that may or may not happen. But again, it depends on how the rest of the game goes. The really key thing with Aggie is that it counters essentially the ability of Fangs, right? The combat card for Fangs is really important in Dracula's kit because it allows him to heal. Dracula doesn't have many ways that he can heal during the game. He does have his feed power card, but the problem is if he's playing feed, he's not placing encounters and he's not moving. So that's disadvantageous. And also if it's the 4th week as well, he doesn't get points for feeding. He could mature Desecrated Soils, but because hunters value Heavenly Host because it does the most damage out of all the combat cards, and it's good for Consecrated Ground, Desecrated Souls normally don't mature unless you see them get used earlier in the game, and you know they're not in the hunter's hands, of course. I'm just speaking very generally there. And what's the other way that he can heal? Desecrated Soil, Feed. Have I forgotten one? No, I think it's Fangs. I think they're the only 3 ways, right? So, and this is the Fangs is probably the best way to try and heal because you're doing it in combat against hunters. You're not having to spend an entire Dracula phase healing. You can do it in combat. But the fact that Aggie just goes, nope, if you're using the Fangs, the 2 damage that you healed back just gets instantly taken away again is huge. Damage sticks on Dracula a lot better. One of the examples I've listed here, which would be great for it, is that it maybe allows hunters to throw out heavily hosts more often earlier in the fight because there's always a risk if you play a heavily host very early and if Dracula then plays Fangs, the hunter's bitten, they're removed from the combat, and Dracula heals, which is such a kick in the teeth after all that. I'm not saying that you should be flippant about hunters getting bitten, but normally, unless it's meaner, the first bite isn't really the issue. Is not really an issue. So you just play the Heavenly Host early. If Dracula fangs you, okay, you still get bitten, removed from combat, but at least Dracula didn't heal, so that's okay. Especially if you've got other hunters who are gonna follow up in the same combat round. Or you can play Heavenly Host first, and Dracula doesn't play Fangs or doesn't have it, and then Dracula tries to fang you as you're escaping. He doesn't heal half of that Heavenly Host damage back up, right? So I think it's really neat. It just means that any damage you do on Dracula sticks more, which is really important. Hunters can afford to take more damage across the course of the game because they can heal up every night if they so wish. The things with hunters, if you burst a hunter, then it's a problem. Or if they've got loads of actions to do and they can't heal efficiently, or they're having to take big risks about searching encounters when they've got low health. But for Dracula, if you do any damage to Dracula, you want it to stick. Oh, Castle Dracula, there we go. I finally remembered. It came into my brain. Dracula could also go back to Castle Dracula, but that also has risks because it's revealed and all this sort of thing, right? So Fangs is the most risk-free way, I guess we'd say, in terms of trying to heal. But if Sister Agatha could just cancel that or counter it, then that's great. The way that I view Sister Agatha is her value increases when the hunters are stretched. Now, what I mean by that is, as a hunter player, you are trying to play the most efficient game possible. You're trying to clear the encounters and keep up with supplies and maintain your items in such a way that you can jump onto Dracula with multiple hunters, ideally 3, or if you get 4, that's really good, and they are well equipped. Obviously, it depends on how much health Dracula has as well, of course. 2 might be enough, but you want your hunters to be as well equipped as possible, and you want to get multiple of them into the fight. In a situation like that, I believe Aggie is not very useful. She is what we call like win more. Yeah, it might stop 2 damage. It doesn't matter because you've got holy bullets and loads of heavily hosts and knives, and you kill Dracula anyway, right? You kill Dracula one round or maybe one combat card quicker. So if you got Sister Agatha in play rather than if you didn't, her value's not really important in that situation, in my opinion. Where she is good is if either the way the hunter is playing, or the way that Dracula is playing, or the way they're adapting to certain situations, or if the meta changes or whatever. And we've seen a little bit more now because of the Immortal update that happened almost a year ago at this point. But it meant that Dracula gets wolf form back sooner, gets hide back sooner, and gets feedback sooner. So um, hunters have less time essentially to be able to sit and supply and do things. They're having to be a bit more proactive, a bit more urgent about what they're doing. But what that means is then they might be jumping into fights where maybe there are 3 hunters in the fight, but they're a little bit weaker. Maybe they haven't been able to supply, and one of them missing a couple of items in there, or maybe they can only get a 2-on-1 fight. That's where Sister Agatha shines. If that gives you that extra little safety net and go, okay, if Dracula fangs, he's not going to heal at that 2 damage. That's 2 less damage I have to deal to him, so I can kill him before he's able to escape his bat and things. Then that is really, really good. As a hunter player, I mean, also she's also good in 1v1 situations, but my honest opinion is hunters should never be trying to go for 1v1 fights unless it's the end of the game and it's a Hail Mary play. Then fair enough. Or if you just sort of accidentally run into Dracula, but ideally hunters want to be avoiding 1v1 fights and disadvantageous 2v1 fights. So because of that, I think Sister Agatha's value shifts depending on the type of combat you're able to initiate. Now, of course, if you've got a situation where Dracula wants to engage in 1v1 fights and to try and beat up the hunters and get some nice heat, even if Dracula takes 5 damage from rifles and holy bullets, well, he can fang 2 of them back up with another fight, and then fang up again and get 2 more health back. If Aggie's in play, I'm not saying it doesn't mean that Dracula won't still do it, but it makes the situation less advantageous for Dracula. Also depends on the position of the map, of course. If Dracula could just easily get into the castle, heal up 5 health, and then just leave, then it doesn't really matter. But that's my honest opinion. My sort of evaluation of Sister Agatha has increased over the last 2 years because Dracula players are getting much better at stretching the hunters in general, and also now we've had a bit of a shift in meta because we've got Dracula players coming in who want to play this more aggressive, let's beat up the hunter style rather than just running away. I think both strategies have merit, by the way. I'm not saying that one is stronger than the other. It's just about adapting to the situation of the game and also what encounter cards Dracula starts with, etc., etc., etc. And also because of the fact that the Immortal update has happened and the trail slides before Dracula moves, well, if you've got the house rule equipped, which we do in our digital edition tournaments, then that also makes games more stretched than they were before. So Sister Agatha has definitely increased in terms of my evaluation of the card. The way that I would kind of summarize these two would be that my guess would be that Rufus is more consistent on average. There are more games where Rufus is more impactful, but Rufus is not the most sort of dramatic of cards. He's just there in the background doing extra damage when Dracula goes to sea. It's not exciting. Whereas Aggie, though I think there are, and I think because the way we think about event cards is quite anecdotal. If you can think of just even a handful of games where Aggie was really impactful, then I think you're going to rate her very highly. But I think there are a lot of games. This is my gut feeling, and the problem is we haven't got any numbers that we can crunch to try and work out who does more damage to Dracula on average or anything. But my gut feeling is that there are a lot of games where Sister Agatha is not relevant, especially because she doesn't work against normal vampires. Right? If we go back to the screen for Sister Agatha for 1 second. I didn't go into the cons, right? it doesn't work on normal vampires. It only works on Dracula. If Sister Agatha worked on new and reckless vampires as well, it'd be S tier. Easily. Easily. But the fact it only works against Dracula, I think there are a lot of games where Dracula takes damage from other things, like a CG, causing problems and causing checkmate penalties, or taking C damage naturally, whether or not Rufus Smith is there or not. That I don't think Agatha's really important. All it takes is just one fight at the end of the game that three hunters jump on and kill Dracula in 2 rounds. Aggie's not even needed. If the hunter meta changes in order to adapt to maybe to the way newer Draculas or different Draculas are playing, then maybe Aggie might become more important. And it might be a psychological boost. If you get Aggie really early, then the hunter player might think to themselves, okay, I've got Aggie, I'm going to be a bit more aggressive now, and let's see what happens. But that's my honest opinion. I think I'm in the minority in terms of the way I feel about these. I think they're in my personal tier list, they're now both A tier, but I would put Aggie towards the lower end of A tier and Rufus Smith kind of more towards the top part of A tier. I know I'm in the minority, but I'll die on this hill. And I've already done the poll of the community. I know I'm in the minority. And I'm sure the comments section is now full of people complaining, going, no, Aggie's S tier. What are you talking about? Aggie's definitely better than Rufus Smith. What are you talking? Rufus Smith is at the bottom. He's rubbish. I will die on this hill. And that's fine. And also, to counter Roscoe's thing, oh, Rufus Smith is useless if Dracula just go to sea. Well, yeah, if there's no combat, then Aggie's useless as well. There you go. Right. So that's just my honest opinion on those two cards. But given the right situation, they both can be very powerful. Of course they can. Right, let's talk about the third one, because this video's gone on long enough as it is. Jovan Harker. There he is. Right. There's a bit of a meme in the community that he is the slowpoke of the Hunter allies, because his ally effect is that he'll reveal the location on the 6th space of Dracula's hideouts. It's actually the way it works when Dracula is in the middle of the Dracula phase and is sliding the trail, and when the location slides into the 6th space, that's when it gets revealed. So it actually gets revealed on Dracula's turn and not on the Hunter's turn, which is kind of interesting. And the issue is, if that location card is on the final space of the trail, depending on where that location is, especially if it's early in the game, the hunters might not be able to get to that location. So it always feels bad when you see that card flip over and it's something like Athens with a hide, and you know there's no way you're getting to it and stopping it, and you think, oh well, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Harker. Very useful. But I'm going to say it. Even if Jovan Harker is slow, I think he's underrated. Is he better than the other two allies? No, definitely not. But I think he's underrated. And I think in the most recent tournament, we actually saw a lot of power of Jonathan Harker, especially in the early game. The reason why Jonathan Harker is not as good as the other two is because A, he doesn't do damage to Dracula, which is the whole objective of the game. So anything that helps with that and reduces, the risk associated with aspects of combat and such, then that's great. But also, he is not very useful as the ally effect from the mid-game onwards. He's only really good in the first... Well, he doesn't activate until essentially the end of Saturday of the first week. So really, you're looking... There's a window between Saturday first week until... I don't know. Saturday of week 2? Is that a bit too ambitious? Where he's relevant. After that, he's not very relevant at all, because the hunters want to be in a position where they are dealing with the trail in such a way that they know where Dracula is going, more or less, at all times, even if they're a couple of steps behind. They don't want to be waiting a whole week for Dracula's location to be revealed. But Jovan Harker is definitely underrated. First of all, if the hunters don't draw newspaper reports in time, then Jonathan Harker might be the only way that you discover that first location with the encounter. I'm also assuming, by the way, that Dracula is misdirecting his initial location, just in case that confuses anybody in terms of the timing. If there are games, and we did the maths in one of the previous videos I did. I talked about all the ways you could find Dracula, and there is a 40% chance that newspaper reports won't be drawn before dawn of Saturday of the first week. And there is a 30% chance that newspaper reports won't be drawn by the time Jonathan Harker would be relevant when that first location with the encounter slides to the sixth space of the trail. So in those 30% of games where newspaper reports isn't going to get drawn, I know it's in the minority, but still, Jonathan Harker might have been drawn earlier, and then he becomes relevant. And then you discover that location, and there is a chance that the hunters can stop that location. If that stops a hoax mature, or stops a 7-point vampire mature, then that automatically he's done his job. It's worth it, in my opinion. But even if newspaper reports was drawn and used, Jonathan Harker still is useful in that sort of second week portion of the game, because revealing the first space with newspaper reports is all fair and well, but then what about all the other locations? Now, if the hunters get lucky and they start drawing hired scouts and things, then sure, they can kind of eliminate things. If it's in an extremity location like Athens, for example, well, you know then he has to go to Valona next. Where's he going after Valona? It's probably Sarajevo or Sofia, right? You can easily deduce where the trail is. But if it's a situation where Dracula's in the center of the board, where there's lots of different connections, there's a lot of places to check, Jonathan Harker makes it easy for you. If, and this is something that I tried to do in the tournament and then I got countered by Jonathan Harker, is a lot of Draculas nowadays like to do an early wolf form. They have their first location, put down the first encounter, and then they misdirect their starting location, and then they wolf form. So you have maybe a hoax or a rumor token on the first space, and then they wolf form. Or vice versa, they'll have the hoax, and then the wolf form, and they'll create that wolf form location to be the vampire with a rumor token. So even if the hunters discovered the first location, but where's the wolf form location? Where's that rumor token? And the newspapers don't help you with that. And sure, the hunters can move around to try to find it, but what happens if it's, say, in the east, where maybe only one or two hunters can get there anyway? If there's a hoax on the first location and one of the hunters is delayed, that's one less person or one person fewer who's able to check the next location. If it's in the center of the board, there are more hunters close by who can maybe try to find the location, but there are more locations you have to check, and you might not find it. So what Jonathan Harker does is reduces the amount of deduction, and I'm not even calling it deduction, let's call it guessing in that case if you're trying to find a rogue wolf form location, right? It reduces the amount of deduction they have to do. If hunters are reducing the amount of deduction they have to do, and then therefore the movement in order to check all those locations, then they can prioritize other things. They're using their movement to maybe get an early fight with Dracula if they're well equipped and they've got Lucy's Revenge or Heroic Leaps and all this sort of thing. Or the hunters can then choose. Jonathan Harker's going to do all the work for me. I can just sit and supply for 2 more turns. And then that's suddenly 4 or 5 extra events across the whole team, and then 4 or 5 extra items across the whole hunter team. And it just makes the hunter's life so much easier. And then once they've got a grip on the trail, they've really supplied up and they're clearing the trail towards the end of the second week, and they're really getting ahead of the rate at which Dracula can place down encounters, and they suddenly draw Rufus Smith or Aggie. Right, okay, Jonathan Harker's done his job. Switch him out. Get one of the other allies in. So the fact that it's reducing the amount of deduction the hunters have to make, and also then it limits the potential of an early wolf form, because all that sort of obfuscation of, oh, let's do an early wolf form to be sneaky. Well, that sneakiness has just been countered completely by Jonathan Harker just sitting there back home doing nothing, right? And just sending his diary entries to you. So there you go. That's the deal. And I think also having a weaker ally out of the 3 actually makes Surprising Return better, because then you know there is an ally that you're almost guaranteed to put into the discard pile. It depends on when Jonathan Harker gets played. But if you draw Jonathan Harker, say, in the second week, more or less, maybe middle part of the second week, and you've got a grip on the trail and you're dealing with it, you don't need Jonathan Harker as the ally effect. And maybe you haven't drawn Rufus Smith or Aggie. Maybe they're buried in the deck and you're never going to get to them anyway. Well, just search with him. You got Surprising Return. You can bring him back later to search on demand. So having a weaker ally is great. Whereas if you draw Rufus Smith or Aggie in the middle of the game, that's where it's not a clear-cut decision. Depends on the rest of the game, of course, but it's not a clear-cut decision. Do you ally them and hoping that Dracula's going to go to sea or going to get into combat? Do you search and then bring them back later? If you ally them initially, then you're not going to be able to use the surprising return to search with them later. But then if you know what I mean? If you then search with them and then think, oh, I can surprisingly return them later, then what do you do with surprising return? Are you searching or are you allying with them, right? It creates a lot of problems. Whereas with Jonathan Harker, second week onwards, it's very easy. Search with him and then put him in the discard pile and then use surprising returns. Wait for the surprising returns to come up and you could use them later. So I think it's kind of nice. Having that weaker ally makes the decision around him much clearer and easier for the hunters rather than the hunter and also then commentary teams and tournaments and stuff getting tied in knots going, should I ally this ally? Should I search with them? I don't have a surprising return yet. Do I search in the hope I'll get a surprising return or not? Just search with Jonathan Harker. There you go. It makes it a nice, easy choice, in my opinion. That was a bit of a ramble. Hopefully that made sense. I'm doing this with no script, by the way, so hopefully this video has been informative and educational. If it's not, leave your scathing comments down below. But anyway, that's been a little review of the three allies, Harker, Rufus, and Aggie. Which one is your favourite? Let me know in the comments below. I expect to see a lot of Aggie fans in there, but that's okay. If anybody believes that Rufus Smith is better, please say so. Stick up for me. We will form the Rufus Smith fan club. Is anybody here who maybe thinks that Jonathan Harker is the best? Maybe a slightly different, slightly, curveball opinion, but let us know if that's the case. And yeah, without further ado, thank you for watching, everybody. As I said, I hope this has been insightful. There's more of these strategy guided videos on the way across the following weeks and months in around the next tournament that's coming up as of the time of recording. So keep an eye out for that. And obviously, yeah, if you are watching this at the time of the release, then just be aware that there is a tournament coming up. If you want to compete, by all means do so. But also, and there's going to be a lot of tournament commentary going on. So feel free to drop into those live streams when they're happening, and you can then talk to the commentators. And even if you're a newer player, don't worry, ask the commentators questions. Now, it doesn't matter how basic the question is, and the commentators can inform you about what's happening in the game and why something's important, etc., etc., and why a certain ally was picked and another one wasn't. So there you go. Take care, everybody. Thank you very much for watching as always. Links below to all the other content creators in the community and the Nomad Discord server and my Twitch, all that stuff. And there's loads more of these strategy guides on my channel and then more to come. Take care, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.